The title list, I'm going to talk a little bit about, last time I was here, I talked about a regulatory overview, so I kind of want to update that for those of you who are here. Last time I was doing this, but we'll also hit on some other kind of themes in the oil and gas business, and this is the world in 10 minutes. One of the big issues you've had over the last little bit is this Keystone Pipeline, and blocking the Keystone line was kind of Washington ridiculousness. So what you're finding is what the EPA has recently said is exactly right as they've studied this issue. You can build a brand new pipe to current specs, or you can build sections of new pipe and reverse existing pipes, because that Canadian crude's coming to the Gulf Coast. So you'll have some new pieces of Keystone. You'll take existing pipes that are inactive, reverse them, and connect them all together, and get that crude to the Gulf Coast. Or you'll put this crude on rail cars. And if anybody's been up the Beltway to the airport, have you guys noticed there's unit trains of crude oil sitting on there? You're going to see those for the next decade because there's not enough pipeline capacity. So get used to that. So the question is, would you rather have crude on rail going through a crossing, or would you rather have crude through an old pipeline that's been reversed, or would you rather have crude on a brand new piece of iron? I'd rather have crude coming down on a brand new piece of iron, but I don't live in Nebraska, so I don't get a vote on that. But the point is, Keystone, the government's basically going to throw their hands up and say, look, the oil's coming, you can build Keystone, right? Because the whole point isn't about Keystone. The whole point was blocking nasty heavy oil, right? That was the agenda. Keystone's going to get built, or something like Keystone, and Canadian heavy crude is going to come and be refined on the Gulf Coast. That's important as we talk about crude production growth in a little bit, okay? So let's talk about unintended consequences of government inaction, and then we'll talk about unintended consequences of government action. This is government inaction. This graph, the red bar is historical through 1998, and then from 1998 a forecast of CO2 emissions from energy consumption. And the green line is actual. We're probably the only country on the planet who is even close to meeting the Kyoto protocols, and we didn't even sign it. Now, guys in Washington are going to be all over this, right? They're going to say, oh, we all love natural gas, and I'm telling you, guys don't know what natural gas is. But what's happened here is, you see this in the last several years, it's really come off as natural gas has replaced coal in the power generation sector. That's all that is. And there is not a single human in Washington on either side of the aisle who can take credit for that, right? That's entrepreneurs. George Mitchell primarily, right? It's the shale plays, it's gas production, and cheap gas drives coal out of the market. So cheap gas-fired power generation is cheaper than coal-fired power generation. The market works, gas-fired power runs, it has less CO2 emissions or fewer CO2 emissions than coal, and hence you have this. This is why, now this was supposed to happen if you're an environmentalist, but this was supposed to happen with wind and solar, which is why environmentalists, right, what you find out is they don't really want CO2 down, they want wind and solar up. So the fact that CO2 is down because of a carbon is still a bad thing from their perspective. Unintended consequences of government inaction, unintended consequences of government inaction, and this is where you reach for some more coffee quickly when you see the title, Renewable Identification Numbers on Ethanol Credits, and you go, oh man, this is boring. But, so what's the story here? The government mandated ethanol, a certain amount of ethanol production or ethanol volumes in the gasoline stream. And they increase over time through 2025, I think. The problem is gasoline demand in the US has been down since 2008. So what's happening is the percentage of ethanol then, and there's no adjustment for that in the law. So effectively, refiners are in a position where they have to blend more ethanol than they want. In other words, you're going to get above that magic 10% number, and I'm telling you, I'm not putting above 10% ethanol in my car, right? Because my engine manufacturer says no. don't run it. So the refiners they're in a position, if they don't put X number of barrels or gallons of ethanol in their gasoline pool, they have to go buy credits. And that's what this is. This is a renewable identification number. It's an ethanol credit. So what you're seeing is ethanol prices over the last little bit as refiners are saying, look, the mandate is I have to put more ethanol in the gasoline pool, but I don't want to because physically the end user doesn't want it. So I'm just going to go buy credits instead of actually putting ethanol in the gasoline pool. And so there's so much demand for these credits, you're seeing the prices of credits go up. And this time frame is just over really so far this year. So you've seen them go up to almost $1 a gallon, which effectively adds 10 cents a gallon to gasoline. What this also says is I'm going to export a lot more gasoline because I can export gas and I don't have to put ethanol in it. So it's unfortunate, and at the end of the day, what you find out is the only people who make money on this are two guys, Goldman and Sachs, because they're the ones who run these credit swap things that are so complicated that 2 semesters of graduate calculus makes it still hard to understand. But this is, you'll hear this, and this is what's happening. You actually have the Senate and House talking about it, and I'd love to see that discussion in Washington where a bunch of policymakers try to undo policy they made several years ago. But again, this is the unintended consequences of government action. It's going to make gasoline prices go up because you're either going to have to buy credits or export gasoline, both of which ultimately cause domestic prices to go high. Let's talk about shales. We all know this, but it's interesting to put the graph up there. This is gas production in the lower 48, natural gas production, not gasoline, natural gas production, and this is why natural gas prices are low and why it's replacing coal in the power stack. And for years we couldn't grow production, right, from 1999 through 2004. And if you look along this line, if I put rig count on here, what's interesting is we're growing production with fewer and fewer rigs. And part of that's efficiency, but part of it is it started out growing with the Barnett and then the Fayetteville and then the Haynesville, and every shale play that came on was successively better and better. So it was a combination of getting better at what we're doing, but just ultimately finding better rock. And there's a lot of inventory out there. So gas prices are going to be low for a while. How do you play that? That's the best thing to happen to the U.S. economy since the Fed started pumping money here. Because the U.S. industrial economy is levered to gas and power, and both gas and power prices are cheap. This is good for glass, rubber, paper, refining, chemicals, right? Everything we make in the U.S. is now advantaged globally. This is a good thing, right? So it's not just fun to look at this graph. It actually has real meaning over the next decade for the U.S. economy. Now let's look at crude oil. Right, that is, think about the growth trajectory in gas, and now look at the growth trajectory in onshore crude oil. So we strip out Alaska and Gulf of Mexico. Right, that is a game changer. Where basically everybody said, you know what, gas prices are really bad, so maybe all this stuff I'm doing on gas I can apply to crude and apply it to not just shale oil like the Bakken, but unconventional tight oil anywhere you find oil, there's lower quality deposits of oil, lower quality reservoir rock, and so you're putting horizontal wells and lots of fracturing. And fracturing does not have a K in it, by the way, contrary to what NPR would like you to believe. So this is basically taking what you learned in gas, you got up the learning curve, and very rapidly applying that to crude, and this is what happens. So there is some risk that this does have an impact on global crude prices, but what's really interesting here, right, the U.S. over the last 2 years has been responsible for all of the net growth in non-OPEC supply. Let me say that again. The U.S., because we've grown onshore from 3 million to 5 million barrels a day, that is all of the net growth in non-OPEC. You can talk Brazil, you can talk Angola, you can talk anywhere else, Russia, you can talk anywhere else you think you're seeing supply growth, but on a net basis, the U.S. is responsible for all of the growth. Because every other country, there's some growth in Brazil, but there's offsets in the North Sea, right? If it weren't for this, the peak oil guys would be pounding their chest and we'd have $130 or $140 crude. right? This is a big deal, right? As good as it's big for the U.S. Now, one of the things, I'm gonna take 2 minutes on this and then I'm done. This is my last slide. One of the things that happens as you see gas production is you'll hear E&P companies talk about liquids-rich production. Are you guys familiar with that term? It's my least favorite term because it's as descriptive as calling a dog a non-cat. It's accurate, but it doesn't mean anything. Are those liquids natural gas liquids? Are they condensate or are they crude? And it matters a lot. And it also matters where that cat's located or that non-dog is located, right? So what do I mean by that? A lot of this gas drilling is gas that has liquids produced with it, and those liquids produce a significant portion of the economics. We've oversupplied ethane in the U.S., and that's good for the U.S. petrochemical business. It's really bad if you're an ethane producer because there's only one use for ethane, and that's to convert to ethylene. You can't export it, and if you're long ethane, prices go to gas equivalent, and you no longer get an uplift. That same process is going to happen with crude and condensate because all of the incremental 2 million barrels of crude is light sweet, and all of that light sweet crude is coming to the Gulf Coast. And we can't export crude. That's a law. It's a bad law, but it's a law. So you can't export crude. So what's going to happen is we're going to build up all this light sweet crude in the Gulf Coast. And we're going to disconnect U.S. pricing from global pricing because the Brent crude out in the boat is going to be $110, and we're going to see much lower prices on the Gulf Coast because we can't get our crude on a boat and ship it to global markets. That's public policy. I don't know if it's good or bad, but if you're a refiner on the Gulf Coast, it's fantastic because you're going to buy crude cheap and you can export refined products. So if I'm a refiner, I'm loving it, and that's good for our area, by the way, because we have a lot of refiners here. So I buy cheap crude, I refine it, and I ship gasoline, distillate, diesel into a global market. It is really a good time to be a refiner, and I've never uttered those words ever in the same sentence. So what's really intriguing here is if I'm a producer of gas, I'm getting a very low price for gas because of supply growth. Who's making money? Who's making money are the guys who transport gas and who consume gas. Same thing on oil. I've got a risk as a producer of getting a lower price for crude than a global equivalent because I'm producing too much. And who's going to win? It's the guys moving it around and processing it, and the end user, ultimately the consumer. So the producer is a victim of their own success, right? This is pretty fascinating times, and that will ultimately roll down. So who makes money? It's the pipe guys, it's the processing guys, it's everybody kind of but the producer. Producers will make a little money, but not as much. It's again the margin shifts downstream from that. So and our view is we don't see any reversal of those trends. So you're going to continue to see production grow in gas and crude, and that should be with us for a while. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton over.